What happens when a young waiter collapses from exhaustion and the man who helps him up turns out to be the owner of the entire chain? Victor Zane stood outside the back entrance of the restaurant, tugging at the brim of his faded baseball cap. His beard was thicker than usual, the glasses slightly oversized. He even wore a small hearing aid in one ear, just enough to throw people off. At 42, most people saw him as a clean-cut CEO who wore suits and spoke in boardrooms. No one would connect him to the quiet dishwasher trainee starting today. 7 stores. That's how many restaurants Victor owned now. He bought the chain 8 years ago when it was bleeding money. He turned it around: new menus, better logistics, cleaner branding. Profits soared. But lately something felt off. The numbers were still solid, but customer complaints were up. Reviews online had gotten harsher. And the turnover rate at Store 5, this one, was double the others. He'd asked for answers. His district manager, Glenn, told him it was just a tough area, and that people didn't want to work hard anymore. That didn't sit right with Victor, so he came here undercover. They'd never met him before. Why would they? It was a corporate chain. Most employees thought the owner lived in another state. Hell, some probably didn't think he existed at all. Inside, the kitchen was already buzzing by the time Victor stepped in. The manager barely glanced up. "You the new guy?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am." "Nick," Victor replied, using the alias he'd picked. "Don't call me ma'am. I'm Tasha. You wash, scrub, and don't talk too much. Got it?" Victor gave a nod. No handshake. No welcome. Just a wave toward the dish pit. The place was hot. The kind of heat that clings to your skin. Within minutes, Victor's shirt was sticking to his back. He noticed the workers moving fast, too fast. No breaks. No smiles. No small talk. It wasn't just busy, it felt tense. Around 11, the morning shift rolled into lunch rush. That's when Victor first noticed the kid. He couldn't have been older than 20. Skinny. Dark circles under his eyes. His name tag read Drew. Drew was everywhere. Taking orders, running food, clearing tables, helping in the back. No one helped him. Not even once. Victor watched as Drew brought out a tray to a table only to be called back to the counter seconds later. He sprinted back, answered a question, then dashed to the kitchen to grab more food. It didn't stop. "You short today?" Victor asked a line cook during a quick water break. The guy, a lanky man named Lou, rolled his eyes. "Short every day. Tasha keeps cutting hours. Says we don't need more people. But we're bleeding out here, man." Victor nodded, breathing heavier than he expected. By 2, his shirt was soaked. His arms ached. He wanted to believe maybe this was just one rough day. But something told him it wasn't. Then it happened. Drew was walking toward the kitchen with a tray in one hand, a pitcher of water in the other. His steps slowed. He blinked hard. Then his knees buckled. The tray clattered to the floor. The pitcher smashed. And Drew collapsed. People shouted. Tasha looked up from the tablet she was glued to and groaned. "Are you kidding me?" No one rushed to help. Victor dropped the rag in his hand and moved fast. He knelt beside Drew, gently tapping his cheek. "Hey kid. Hey. You okay?" Drew's eyes fluttered open. His face was pale, lips dry. "Didn't eat since yesterday," he mumbled. Victor's jaw tightened. He turned to the others. "Someone get water. Now." A waitress hesitated, then ran off. Tasha finally wandered over. "He does this. Always pushing himself. If he just paced." "You let him work like this?" Victor snapped. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Who are you to talk to me like that?" Before Victor could answer, Drew grabbed his arm. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Please don't send me home. I need the hours." Victor didn't say anything. He just helped the kid sit up, handed him the water once it arrived, and stayed with him until the color returned to his cheeks. But inside, Victor's blood was boiling. At the end of the shift, Tasha pulled him aside. "Next time, don't make a scene. We can't baby everyone. You want to last here, mind your lane." Victor glanced around. A few employees were watching. Their faces said everything. They were tired, scared, beaten down. He nodded slowly. "Right, I'll keep that in mind." But what he was really thinking was, this isn't just a staffing issue. This is a leadership problem. And he was going to fix it starting tomorrow. Victor arrived early the next morning, well before the front doors unlocked. The morning air clung to the ground in a light fog, and the street out front was still quiet, save for the occasional delivery truck rumbling past. He leaned against the side of the building and sipped from a cheap thermos he'd picked up on the way. The coffee inside was lukewarm, but it gave him something to do with his hands while he waited. Around the corner, a familiar shuffle caught his ear. Drew appeared, hoodie pulled tight, backpack slung over one shoulder. His steps were slower than yesterday, but he was upright. That alone was something. Victor gave a small nod as the kid approached. "You sure you're ready to be here?" Drew squinted at him, then seemed to recognize his face. "You're the new guy, right?" "Nick." "That's me." "I'm good," Drew said quickly. "Yesterday was just bad timing." Victor didn't press. He watched the kid fish a granola bar out of his backpack and take a small bite as they waited by the side door. No one else had shown up yet. The manager clearly wasn't in a rush. Drew leaned against the brick wall and looked over. "You ever work in kitchens before?" "Here and there," Victor said without elaborating. "You been here long?" "Little over a year," Drew said. "Longer than most, I guess." "You like it?" Drew hesitated. "I like parts of it. I like when it's busy, makes the shift go faster. I like some of the folks I work with. But I don't know. It's hard to explain." Victor waited. Drew looked away. "It's just some stuff here doesn't make sense. Schedules change without warning. We run out of supplies, but no one orders more. If someone messes up, they get called out in front of everyone. But when someone does something right, nothing." He peeled the wrapper off the granola bar and tucked it back in his bag. "Anyway, doesn't matter. Just gotta keep my head down. Save up. Get out." "Get out where?" "Trade school, maybe. I want to work with my hands. Real work, not this." Before Victor could say anything else, the door clattered open. A prep cook he hadn't met yet gestured for them to come in. Drew gave a short nod and disappeared inside. The kitchen smelled of bleach and leftover grease from last night's clothes. Victor tied on a fresh apron and got to work. The breakfast rush was lighter than lunch, and he found a rhythm scrubbing trays and stacking clean dishes. Around mid-morning, a woman in her late 30s clipped past the dish pit. She wore polished shoes and a slim, black blazer, not the kind of outfit anyone else in the store had on. "You're new?" she asked, eyes flicking toward his name tag. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't correct him. "I'm Marlene, District Compliance." Victor kept his tone even. "Didn't know we had someone from corporate today." "Routine visit," she said. "I'm reviewing logs, safety reports, payroll alignment. Just making sure everything's in order." She walked off before he could reply. Her clipboard was already full of notes. Victor wiped his hands and stepped out of the dish area. He found Marlene near the employee lockers, flipping through a binder. "If you don't mind me asking," he said, "is this store doing okay? Like, compared to the others?" She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Just curious." "It's been intense." Marlene studied him for a moment. "This location's been flagged for a few things: turnover, underreported overtime, customer satisfaction dips. But those are just numbers. We don't micromanage unless something major pops up." Victor nodded. "Got it." She returned to her paperwork. Later that afternoon, a delivery truck backed into the alley. Victor offered to help unload. The driver, a short man with a gruff voice, handed him a clipboard. "Sign here, and keep an eye on your dry storage. Last week, y'all were missing 3 cases of pasta." Victor signed and made a mental note. Missing inventory. Another layer. Inside, he passed the walk-in cooler and noticed the door ajar. Inside, Lou was checking labels on some meat packages. "Everything good in here?" Victor called. "Barely," Lou muttered. "That roast beef's 3 days past the toss date. But we're not throwing it because Tasha said we're already over budget." Victor stepped inside. The air was sharp with cold, and something faintly sour lingered near the back shelf. "Does that happen often?" Lou didn't look up. "More than it should." Victor didn't reply. He just backed out of the cooler and closed the door. At the end of the shift, Victor found Drew in the alley again, sitting on an overturned milk crate, lacing up worn sneakers. "You walking home?" "Bus," Drew said. "It's cheaper." Victor nodded toward the horizon. The sun had dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky a dull orange. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning about things not making sense here." Drew gave a half smile. "It's whatever. I've learned not to expect much. That doesn't mean it's right." A pause. Drew looked at him again, brow furrowed. Why do you care? Victor didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the street. A garbage truck clanked past. Sometimes it matters to someone, he said finally. Even if it doesn't seem like it. Drew stood. Well, thanks for helping me yesterday. Most people wouldn't have. He slung his backpack over a shoulder and headed off down the sidewalk. Victor watched until he disappeared around the corner. Inside, the restaurant was winding down. The evening manager, a wiry man named Troy, was barking at someone about mop buckets. A hostess was counting tips at the counter, eyes down. No one seemed in control. Everyone just moved to avoid friction. Victor grabbed his things and stepped out the back door. He didn't head home right away. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the building, looking at the faded signage, the cracked pavement near the loading zone, the flickering bulb above the side entrance. He pulled out his phone and took a few photos. Not for evidence. For himself. He wanted to remember how far off the rails this place had gone. The next morning, he reported to the prep station as usual, but this time he asked to help with front of house. Tasha raised an eyebrow but didn't object. She'd never cared much about where anyone worked, as long as someone filled the gap. Victor grabbed an apron and started learning the register from a cashier named Sierra. She was quick, sharp, and clearly frustrated. Why's the system freezing every 5 minutes? He asked after the third reboot. Because we haven't gotten a software update in over a year, she said. I've told Tasha. She says if it's not completely broken, it's not a priority. He watched her handle a line of customers with clinical precision. No smile, no small talk, just speed. Do you like working here? He asked. She stared at him. I like getting paid. When the lunch rush hit, Victor saw it all again from a new angle. Orders backed up. Food sat in the window too long. A mother at table 9 waited 20 minutes for a side of fries. A man at table 4 sent his burger back twice, then walked out. At one point, Drew reappeared, now on food running duty. He moved slower than yesterday, but still faster than anyone else. He delivered a tray to a booth with 2 kids and a tired-looking father. On his way back, Tasha stopped him. You missed the ketchup for table 12. I was gonna grab it next, Drew said. You were supposed to grab it when you took the tray. Victor watched the exchange from the register. Tasha's voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A few customers turned their heads. I said I'll get it now, Drew repeated quietly. You don't tell me what you'll do. You do what I say when I say it, Tasha snapped. Victor stepped from behind the counter and approached. I can grab the ketchup, he said. No big deal. Tasha looked at him like he'd stepped out of line. I wasn't talking to you. I know, Victor said, voice calm. But he's already juggling half the floor. Tasha turned and walked away without another word. Victor grabbed the ketchup, dropped it off, and returned to the counter. Sierra gave him a sideways glance but said nothing. By the end of the shift, Drew looked spent again. Not collapsed, but close. Victor helped him wipe down tables, neither of them speaking for a while. Then Drew said, You ever work somewhere that actually gave a damn? I've seen it, Victor said. But it doesn't happen by accident. Drew paused, then nodded. They finished cleaning in silence. Victor left the store that night with a single thought echoing in his head. Tomorrow he'd stop observing. Tomorrow he'd start fixing. Victor didn't clock in the next morning. He walked in through the front like any other customer and took a seat at the far corner booth, the one partially obscured by a tall potted plant. From there, he had a clear view of the register, the kitchen swing doors, and the entrance. He wore the same wrinkled jeans and jacket, but the hat and glasses were gone. He wasn't hiding anymore. At exactly 7:58, Drew pushed through the front door, rubbing his hands together to fight the morning air. His hair was damp, probably from a rushed shower. He gave a small wave to Sierra behind the counter and disappeared into the back. A server placed a menu in front of Victor. He didn't open it. Just coffee, he said, keeping his voice low. Black. The server nodded and walked off. Through the plant's leaves, Victor spotted Glenn walking in. Clipboard in hand, shirt tucked in, eyes scanning the room like he was already late for whatever came next. He moved past the dining room without acknowledging anyone and headed straight into the kitchen. Victor stood up. Quietly, he made his way to the hallway by the restrooms and slipped into the storage closet. It was cramped, but the slatted door gave him line of sight into the manager's office. Inside, Glenn was already talking. She's not here yet? He asked no one in particular. She usually rolls in around 9, Troy answered. Unless she's got an excuse. Victor stepped back into the hallway and waited. 2 minutes later, Tasha walked in carrying a smoothie and a half-eaten muffin. She gave Glenn a nod, then dropped her bag by the desk. "You've been posting schedules late again," Glenn said, flipping through his clipboard. "We've been short-staffed. I'm doing what I can. You're posting them Saturday nights. That's not acceptable." Victor leaned forward slightly. Tasha didn't flinch. "Well, if people didn't quit every other week, maybe I'd have a schedule to post," she replied. "You've had 3 write-ups for late time cards, 2 for expired inventory, and now I'm getting customer feedback about unclean dining areas. I clean up what I can. The rest? Not my problem." Victor stepped into the office doorway. "It's your store," he said evenly. "If it's not your problem, whose is it?" Tasha's head snapped toward him. Glenn turned around, confused. Victor took 2 steps into the room and extended his hand to Glenn. "I'm Victor Zane, owner of this company." Glenn didn't move. Tasha slowly stood up. "You were the dishwasher?" Victor ignored the question. "I've been working this location for the last few days. Watching, listening, and I'm not impressed." Glenn regained his composure and offered a stiff handshake. "Mr. Zane, I had no idea. You wouldn't. That was the point." Tasha folded her arms. "You came in pretending to be someone else? That's not exactly professional." "You're right. It's not. But I had to see for myself what kind of leadership was being passed off as normal here. People are scared to speak. Your best worker nearly collapsed from exhaustion, and I've seen more expired product in 3 days than I ever should." Glenn cleared his throat. "If there are operational gaps, I'll address them immediately." Victor turned to him. "You've had months to address them. Store 5's been underperforming since spring, and all I got were excuses. You told me this location had a motivation problem. What it has is a culture problem." Glenn's face tightened. "I've been managing 6 locations. I can't babysit everyone. I'm not asking you to babysit. I'm asking you to lead. There's a difference." Victor looked back at Tasha. "You've been running the store like a pressure cooker. Your staff is burning out. Your turnover rate is over 60%. And you're cutting corners to stay under budget, which means spoiled food on plates and unsafe working conditions in the back." Tasha's voice rose. "I kept this place open with no support. No extra staff. No budget adjustments. You think anyone offered to help when we lost our grill guy and our host in the same week?" Victor didn't blink. "It's not about the budget. It's about how you treat people. You humiliate staff in front of customers. You ignore safety. You push people until they break, then call them weak." She didn't respond. Victor stepped back. "Effective immediately, you're being removed from this location. HR will follow up with transition details." Glenn looked stunned. "You're terminating her now?" "I'm removing her from the position. Whether she remains with the company depends on what HR finds in the formal review. But she's not running this store another day." Tasha's mouth opened, then closed. She grabbed her bag and walked out without a word. Victor turned to Glenn. "I'll need a full staff audit by end of day. Schedule reviews, payroll logs, inventory reports. Everything. And I want the next 2 weeks of shifts approved by me personally." Glenn gave a tense nod and left the office. Victor sat at the desk, pulled out his tablet, and started drafting a message to corporate HR. An hour later, the staff gathered in the dining room. They stood in loose clusters, some still in aprons, others half in uniform, waiting. Sierra leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Lou rested a hand on the back of a chair. Drew stood near the exit, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Victor stood at the front. "I'm not here to give a speech," he began. "You've already heard enough of those. But I owe you the truth." He paused, letting the silence settle. "My name is Victor Zane. I own this company. For the last few days, I've been working here under a different name. Washing dishes, running food, listening." Some eyebrows lifted. No one spoke. "I did it because I wasn't getting straight answers. I knew something was wrong, but I needed to see it for myself. And what I saw was a team doing everything they could to hold things together while leadership failed them." Victor looked at Drew. "No one should be afraid to take a break. No one should feel guilty for needing rest. He looked at Sierra. No system should make your job harder because we haven't upgraded basic tools. Then to Lou, and no one should be told to serve expired food. Ever. Victor took a breath. Tasha's no longer managing this store. We'll be bringing in interim leadership while we restructure. But I'm not just replacing people. I'm changing how this store operates. Still, no one moved. I'll be holding one-on-one meetings this week with anyone who wants to talk. You won't be punished for honesty. If you've got ideas, complaints, concerns, bring them. Sierra raised her hand slightly. And if things don't change, then I failed, Victor said. And you'll know it. But I didn't come here to make promises I can't keep. I came here to rebuild something that should have never broken in the first place. Lou muttered, "Guess we'll see." Victor nodded. "Yes, you will." He dismissed the staff and returned to the office. For the rest of the afternoon, he met with employees one by one. Some were cautious. Others came in with printed notes. Ideas ranged from menu tweaks to scheduling systems. A few asked about raises. One cook requested better gloves. When Drew entered, he didn't sit. "I don't really know what to say," he began. "You don't have to say anything," Victor replied. "But if there's something you want, now's the time to ask for it." Drew looked down at his shoes. "I just want to come to work and not feel like I'm one mistake away from getting fired." Victor nodded. "That's fair. I'm not looking for handouts. Just want to do a good job and not get yelled at for trying. You've done more than that, Drew. You've kept this place running when it shouldn't have been." Drew didn't respond. Victor stood. "We're setting up a development program. You'll have a mentor from another store, someone who'll help you train in areas you're interested in. If you want to move up, we'll make that path real. If you want to move on, we'll help with that too." Drew's jaw tightened slightly. No one's ever offered that before. They should've. As Drew left, Victor sat back down at the desk. There was still a lot to fix. Broken systems, burnt-out staff, a reputation to rebuild. But for the first time since walking into Store 5, he didn't feel like he was chasing shadows. He finally knew exactly what needed to change. Victor stood in the back office of Store 5, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, and a half-empty notebook in front of him. The past week had been a blur of decisions, meetings, and swift restructuring. He hadn't returned to corporate headquarters. Not yet. There was still too much to finish here. He glanced at the dry erase board he'd dragged in from the break room. Names were listed on the left side, followed by 3 columns: role, hours, and notes. Every employee had been spoken to, every schedule reviewed, every work history pulled. A knock at the door. Sierra leaned in. "New guy just walked in. Says he's the interim. Send him back." When the door opened again, a man in his early 40s stepped through. He wore jeans, a checkered button-down, and a watch scuffed from years of kitchen work. His expression was calm but sharp. "Name's Marcus," he said. "You wanted someone who's worked the floor and run the books." "That's still the plan." Victor stood and offered a handshake. "If you're willing to take the heat. Already been at 2 stores tougher than this one. I'll manage." Victor gestured to the board. "You'll have full support. Staffing's been stabilized, vendor issues resolved, and corporates approved a tech refresh. But the big fix is culture. You're not just running shifts. You're rebuilding trust." Marcus pulled out a chair and Saturday, "How bad is it?" "They don't speak unless they have to. Most of them think this place is a dead end." Marcus nodded. "Then we start small. Let them solve problems and see the results. I'll be on site the rest of the week. After that, it's yours." As Marcus reviewed the notes, Victor stepped out into the dining area. It was late morning, the lull between breakfast and lunch. A few customers lingered over coffee, and a delivery guy was stocking the bar fridge near the register. Drew was at the far end, wiping down menus. Victor walked over and leaned against the host's stand. "You still thinking about trade school?" Drew didn't look up. "Yeah. Found a program that starts in January. Welding. You apply yet?" "Not yet. Gotta save a bit more." Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "That's a company-sponsored grant. Covers tuition for vocational programs. We don't advertise it, but it's real." Drew hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you stayed. You showed up when it was easier not to. And because I want the people who carry this place to know they're seen. Drew took the paper, eyes scanning it slowly. I didn't expect any of this. You shouldn't have to expect it. It should be normal. Victor turned slightly as Lou approached from the back. We're running low on gloves again, Lou said. Last order didn't come in full. Victor nodded. I've already called the supplier. We're switching vendors next week. You'll have an order sheet you can update yourself. No more filtering requests through 3 people. Lou blinked, then gave a short nod. All right. When he walked off, Victor noticed Sierra near the bar, watching. He crossed to her. Got a minute? She dried her hands and leaned on the counter. I'm not used to managers asking that. I'm not a manager, right? You're the guy who owns the name on the paycheck. Victor motioned to a stool. Mind if I sit? Go ahead. I saw how you handled the register when it crashed. You're fast under pressure. I've had practice. You ever think about moving up? Sierra tilted her head. You offering me a promotion? I'm offering training. You'd keep your current hours while shadowing Marcus on shift management. If it's not a fit, no harm done. If it is, we'll support the move. She looked away for a second, then back. I've worked here 3 years. No one's ever asked me that. They should've. Sierra stood. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. By afternoon, the lunch rush began to build. Victor stayed near the front, not managing, just watching. Marcus moved through the kitchen with quiet authority, checking station times and stepping in to help plate when needed. The staff hadn't relaxed fully, but the tension had started to crack. At one point, a tray of drinks slipped out of a server's hand. Ice scattered across the tile. Before anyone said a word, Marcus grabbed a towel and crouched down. No big deal, he said. Just grab another tray. The server blinked, then nodded. No eye roll. No lecture. Victor moved into the kitchen and found Lou by the grill. How's it feeling today? Less chaotic, Lou said. Still busy, but manageable. You feel like we're heading the right direction? Lou didn't answer right away. Then, ask me in a month. That night, Victor stayed late after close. The dining area was dark except for the emergency lights near the back. He sat at a booth with a laptop open and a final checklist in front of him. The exit interview with Glenn had been brief. He'd reassigned him to a lower volume district pending review. Tasha had declined HR's invitation to meet. She was gone and the company wouldn't chase her. Footsteps approached. You're still here? Drew asked. Wrapping up. I thought you'd be gone by now. Victor closed the laptop. I will be. But I wanted to ask you something first. All right. If you were running this place tomorrow, what would you do? Drew sat across from him, thinking. First thing? I'd fix the way we close. People always rush it. Leaves the morning shift picking up the mess. Victor nodded. Then I'd rotate people more. Same person shouldn't be stuck on the register 5 shifts in a row. And, Drew hesitated. I'd stop letting everyone get away with the bare minimum. Some people do twice the work, and no one notices. Victor folded his arms. You've been watching. Hard not to. There's a team lead position opening. It's not full management, but it's more than a server. You'd help with prep, trackside duties, lead floor resets. Interested? Drew blinked. Is this because I collapsed? No. It's because you didn't give up afterward. Drew leaned back. Yeah. I'd be interested. Victor slid a folder across the table. Read it over. Let me know if you accept. Drew picked up the folder but didn't open it. Victor stood and stretched. I won't be back for a while, but Marcus will keep me updated. You trust him. Enough to hand him the keys. Drew stood too. Thanks. For how you handled all this. Victor looked around the dining room. This place deserved better. Now it's got a chance. He left through the front, the glass door swinging shut behind him. 2 weeks later, Victor sat in his office at headquarters, reviewing site reports. Store 5's numbers were steady. Customer feedback had improved. Staff retention had stabilized. But more importantly, the weekly notes from Marcus painted a picture of a team beginning to believe in the work again. Victor closed the file and leaned back. He'd built something that had grown faster than he could follow. But going undercover reminded him what mattered. Not margins, not expansion, not branding. People. Not just the ones who ran the stores. The ones who held them together when no one was watching. And now he had a plan to stay connected. Every quarter, he'd visit a different store without notice. No fanfare, no press, just work, listening, helping, learning, because leadership didn't come from a title. It came from knowing when to stop talking, start acting, and remember who you're doing it for. The air inside Store 5 was different now, not lighter, not cheerful, but steadier. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when people are still cautious but no longer bracing for the next hit. It had been 32 days since Victor left. No announcements, no press, just absence. Exactly as planned. Marcus had taken over fully. He didn't talk much in meetings, didn't bother with long memos or drawn-out feedback sessions. He asked questions that didn't sound like tests and offered help without turning it into a lesson. People adjusted to him because he didn't ask them to perform. He asked them to pay attention. On a Wednesday morning, the kitchen clock ticked past 8 when Drew stepped into the break room, still tying his apron. He poured himself a cup of water from the dispenser, glanced at the whiteboard, and nodded to himself. His name was written in blue marker under Team Lead Floor Ops, a new entry that had been added 2 weeks ago and hadn't been erased since. He walked out to the front and found Sierra adjusting the chairs near the window. "Your opening host today?" he asked. She looked up. "Yeah." Marcus said, "He's rotating everyone for a while. Wants to see who adapts." "You ever done it before?" "Not in this building." He helped her adjust the last 2 chairs, then pointed out the drawer key taped beneath the podium shelf. "No one tells you about that," he said. She pulled it off the tape and glanced at it. "You figured that out?" "It was missing the first time I opened alone. I panicked for 10 minutes before I spotted it." "You could have said something." "I was trying to prove I didn't need help." She laughed once. "You're terrible at hiding things. You clench your jaw when you're overwhelmed." "That obvious?" "Painfully." He smiled, then turned toward the kitchen as the prep buzzer buzzed twice. On his way through the swinging doors, he passed Lou, who was talking quietly with one of the newer hires, a teenager named Felix who barely spoke above a whisper. "You got someone training him today?" Drew asked. Lou nodded. "I told him to shadow me for now. He needs to see pace before he tries to match it." "Smart. I'm not working him hard. Just keeping him moving." Inside the prep area, the produce order had arrived late. Half the lettuce looked wilted. A few tomatoes were split. Drew pulled the invoice from the clipboard and walked to the back office. Marcus was at the desk reviewing a vendor spreadsheet. "The truck just dropped. Some of the greens aren't usable." Marcus looked up. "How many cases?" 3. Maybe 4. "Document it. Take photos. Don't toss anything until I speak to the rep." Drew handed him the invoice. "You think we need to switch suppliers again?" "No. I think they're testing limits. That stops now." "Want me to call them?" "Not yet. I'll handle it." Drew paused. "You think they're doing it on purpose?" Marcus met his eyes. "If they are, they won't do it twice." Back on the floor, the opening team ran their checks. The host stand was stocked. Registers rebooted. The first customer walked in at 8:58. A woman with 2 toddlers and a stroller that barely fit through the door. Sierra greeted her gently, offered a corner booth, and helped tuck the stroller out of the walkway. By noon, the lunch rush had hit. It wasn't chaotic, just fast. Orders came through clean. Plates went out hot. Marcus walked the line once every 20 minutes, nodding if something looked right, correcting only when needed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't hover. At one point, a server named Renee dropped a tray of drinks near table 7. The glasses shattered and the ice skidded under the booth. Without a word, Marcus grabbed a broom while Drew blocked the aisle. No lecture. Just cleanup. 2 hours later, Drew was at the side station wiping down a tray when Felix approached him. "You got a second?" Drew nodded. "What's up?" Felix fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. "I think I messed up the side salad on table 3. I forgot the cucumbers." "They ask for them?" "No. But it's in the default. Then correct it before they notice. Quietly. Don't wait for someone to complain." Felix nodded and turned away, then stopped. "Thanks for not making a big deal." Drew shrugged. "You're learning. Mistakes are part of that." At the end of the shift, the team gathered near the back door before clocking out. Marcus stood at the edge of the group. "Quick note. he said. Starting next week, we're testing a new floor layout. Tables 12 through 16 will shift for better flow. I'll post the diagram tomorrow. Someone asked about seating assignments. Marcus answered directly. No one lingered. After most of the crew left, Sierra stayed behind to count tips. Drew leaned on the counter next to her. You're picking it up fast, he said. I didn't think I'd enjoy it. Turns out I like knowing who's walking in before they sit down. You're good with people. I'm good at reading them. Not the same thing. He tilted his head. Close enough. She closed the tip book. You staying on floor lead? For now. Marcus asked if I'd consider shift supervisor eventually. You thinking about it? I don't know. I like this role. It keeps me moving. I'm not sure I want a clipboard yet. You'd be good at it. Appreciate that. She started walking toward the back. Don't wait too long. People notice who's stepping up. That night, Drew stayed behind after close to run a full inventory. It wasn't assigned. He'd offered. As he crossed off items on the dry storage list, he didn't hear the door open behind him. You always stay this late now? He turned. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms folded. Only when the counts haven't been updated in 3 days. Marcus walked over and glanced at the sheet. You're doing it manually? System import's been glitching. Figured I'd get a baseline the old way. Marcus nodded slowly. You ever think about long-term? Drew set the clipboard down. What do you mean? Staying in this industry. Not just at this store. I used to think about leaving. Still might. You'd be wasted in a welding shop. Drew laughed under his breath. You sound like Victor. He's not wrong. You've got instincts most people don't develop until they burn out 3 jobs. Drew leaned against the shelf. I'm not sure I want to run a place like this. Then don't. Run it better. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Finally, Marcus said, I've got an invite to a training seminar next month. Regional team leads from 6 districts. They want one from this store. Drew blinked. You want me to go? You've earned it. Will I need to present? Just listen. Meet people. See what's out there. Drew picked the clipboard back up. I'll think about it. Marcus nodded and walked out. The next morning, Drew arrived earlier than usual. The front was still dark. He unlocked the side door and entered quietly. On the break room corkboard, a new flyer had been pinned up. It was a corporate memo. Internal development tracks now accepting nominations. Below it, someone had written a single name in blue ink. Drew. He stared at it for a long moment. Later that day, as the lunch shift came and went, Victor called Marcus from headquarters. The conversation was brief. Updates were shared. Numbers reviewed. Marcus spoke plainly, as always. Before hanging up, Victor asked one question. How's he doing? Marcus didn't hesitate. He's not just holding the floor together. He's setting the tone. Victor smiled, then ended the call. Back at Store 5, Drew stepped out onto the sidewalk during his break. The traffic moved steadily past. He checked his watch. 15 minutes left. He folded his arms and leaned against the brick wall. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something better. He felt like he was already building it.